everybody! Welcome to Kitty Cat Storytime today with Evie and me. We're going to read a nonfiction book today about the moon. And it's going to have real information and real pictures in it to hopefully let us know a little bit more about the moon. If there's ever anything you wanted to learn about the moon, we're going to hopefully find it out in this book. It's by Seymour Simon. The moon is Earth's closest neighbor in space. It is about 1/4 of a million miles away. In space, that's pretty close. The moon travels around the Earth. It is Earth's only natural satellite. A satellite is an object that travels around another object. The moon takes about 27 days and 8 hours to go around the Earth once. There's part of the moon there. The moon is so close to the Earth that you can easily see light and darkness on its surface. This photograph of the moon was taken through a telescope on Earth. The light places are mostly mountains and hills. The dark places are flatlands. So these light places are mountains and these dark places are flatlands. The moon has thousands of craters covering its surface. Craters are ring-shaped flatlands with walls around them. A few craters on the moon are more than 50 miles wide, but most are smaller. Many of the craters are only a few feet wide. The moon is made of rock. We can see only part of the moon lit by sunlight. Sometimes we see the full moon. Other times we see a thin sliver. Every night the moon looks a little different. Each different shape is called a phase of the moon. The phases go all dark, new moon through full moon, and back to new moon in about 29 days. We call the phase in this photograph a crescent moon. From the earliest times, people gazed up at the moon and wondered about it. Was the moon a world like ours? Are there living things on the moon? Would we ever be able to travel to the moon? Over the years, scientists learned much about the moon by studying it from Earth with telescopes and other instruments. But many things were still unknown. Then, in 1961, the United States government decided to try to send a person to the moon within 10 years. The space program was named Apollo. This photograph taken from the Apollo 2 Columbia spacecraft shows the lunar landing ship Eagle on its way back from the surface of the moon. The surface of the moon is visible 60 miles below the spacecraft. 250,000 miles away. A partly lit Earth hangs above the moon's horizon. So that's the Earth from the moon. Before the space age, no one had ever seen the far side of the moon. That's because the same side of the moon has always faced the Earth. Then, spaceships from the Earth went around the moon. Here is one of the photographs taken from a spaceship. It shows parts of the moon's far side. You can see craters and mountains, much like those on the side of the moon that we see from Earth. But the far side has new flatlands, or seas. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first person to set foot on the moon. Armstrong was one of the astronauts on the Apollo 2 flight to the moon. He was followed shortly by Edwin Aldrin, another member of the United States Apollo 2 spaceflight. This is a photograph of astronaut Aldrin standing on the moon. The face mask of his spacesuit reflects astronaut Armstrong. They took a picture of each other. The footprint on the moon marks the first time that human beings have walked on the ground that was not Earth. The footprint may last for a million years or longer. That is because there's no air on the moon, and without air, there can be no winds to blow the dust around. The astronauts could jump much higher on the moon than on Earth. People weigh much less on the moon than they do on the Earth. The moon's gravity is 1/6 that of the Earth's. Gravity causes objects to have weight. In places where there's less gravity, you weigh less, and you can jump higher. That's why astronauts could leap on the moon's surface. To find out what you would weigh on the moon, divide your weight by 6. So if you weigh 60 pounds and you divide that by 6, you'd only be 10 pounds on the moon. That's pretty neat. The astronauts discovered that the moon is a silent, strange place. The moon has no air. Air carries sound. With no air, the moon is completely silent. Even when the astronauts broke rocks or used the rockets on their spaceship, Sound could not be heard. The sky on the moon is always black. On Earth, we can see stars only at night. On the moon, stars shine all the time. The moon does not have air, water, clouds, rain, or snow. It doesn't have any weather. But the surface of the moon does warm up or cool off. The ground gets very hot or very cold because there's no air to spread the heat. The temperatures in the daytime can be above the boiling point of water. At night, the temperatures can drop hundreds of degrees below zero. The astronauts' spacesuits keep their bodies at the right temperature. The astronauts carried tanks on their backs that carried the air they would need for breathing. So good thing they have those suits on. They help keep their temperature normal and let them have air that they need to breathe. Without air and water, the moon's surface has not worn away very much. The surface has changed so little that it holds clues to the earthly history of the moon. The astronauts searched for these clues. They collected rocks and brought them back to the Earth for scientists to study. They set up instruments to find moonquakes and to learn about other conditions on the moon. They photographed whatever they saw. Kind of cool to take pictures of the moon. Each Apollo crew brought back new information about the moon. The astronauts of Apollo 15 stayed nearly 67 hours on the moon. They returned with 173 pounds of moon rocks and soil. Scientists all over the world studied the information the astronauts brought back. They learned that the moon is about the same age as the Earth, but the moon's soil and rocks are different from the Earth. For instance, moon rocks contain no water at all, while almost all rocks on Earth contain a small amount of water. Scientists also learned that many millions of years ago, the inside of the moon was hot enough to melt rock. Melted rock, or lava, spilled over the surface of the moon. The lava formed lakes and then hardened. The solid lava became dark flatlands. This is a photograph of flatlands on the moon. All of the small pits were made up by rock from space that hit the flatlands after they had hardened. They're learning so much from this information. After millions of years, the inside of the moon cooled off. The lava stopped flowing. The moon then looked as if it does today. Its surface is covered with craters, mountains, valleys, and flatlands. There are very few changes on the moon today, but there are thousands of tiny moonquakes every year. This is a photograph of a giant crater that's almost 50 miles wide. The crater was formed when a huge rock from space crashed into the moon and buried itself. The rocks on the surface of the moon exploded. You can see the mountain peak that was formed in the center of the crater. The explosion also created the crater walls. Rocks and dust scattered for miles in all directions. So that's the little mountain that was created. It looks little in the picture, but I'm sure it's huge. Apollo 17 was the last spaceship to carry people to the moon. It was launched in December of 1972. The astronauts of Apollo 17 discovered the oldest rock ever found was on the moon. Scientists on Earth tested the rock. They discovered that it was more than 4,500 million years old. They named it the Genesis Rock. Before the astronauts returned to the Earth, they left a plaque on the moon showing the history of the moon travel. They also left a falcon feather and a four-leaf clover. The feather and the four-leaf clover stand for living things on Earth. So they left some things out there. Scientists have learned much about the moon from the Apollo space flights. They have found the answers to many questions they once had. For example, the moon rocks brought back from Apollo astronauts help explain how the moon was formed. Scientists think that long ago the Earth collided in space with a very large object. They believe the moon formed from the material ejected from the Earth during that collision. But in science, the questions never cease. Did the moon have water once? Did it ever have a magnetic field like the Earth's? Much of the moon still remains a mystery. So that's like one of those space cars they can use to drive around on the moon. Earth and the moon are close in space, but very different from each other. Earth is a blue, cloud-covered planet filled with living things. The moon is a dead world. Without air or water, a cloud can never appear in its black sky, and a raindrop will never fall. Very interesting. So I hope you learned a little bit about the moon from listening to this story. I certainly did. Eevee wandered away. There's a bird out my window, so she's watching that right now. But I hope you enjoyed Kitty Cat Storytime today with me and Eevee. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!